Hey, what's up, Masters? Welcome to another episode of Path to Mastery podcast. Today we are with Jeremy Hurewitz, and Jeremy's going to talk to us today about how to sell like a spy. What's going on, Jeremy?
Hey, David, great to be with you today.
Absolutely, man. And thanks for doing this. And a little bit about you. I know you were involved with the intelligence agency, correct, for a while, and
I never served, never worked for the government. I've been a corporate spy, so I just want to be
corporate.
upfront about that. But
What's the difference between a corporate spy, and a governmental spy?
Well, as I write a lot about in my book, I have a ton of respect for these guys. Would never want to sort of pretend like I was, a CIA case officer. But in my work over the last 15 years in corporate intelligence, I've worked with many CIA case officers side by side. So learned a lot about the tradecraft, as well as many other former government officials. And we can get into that. And happy to explain a little bit more about what corporate espionage is and how it differs from, say, government-led espionage.
Okay, awesome.
After I came back from my decade overseas as a journalist and building the media association you mentioned, I was kind of trying to figure out where my skill set would fit in. And I came upon this world of corporate security, which features mostly former government officials, former CIA case officers, FBI agents, and others from law enforcement, military veterans, in particular, special forces, lawyers from the Department of Justice. So that and these groups work in a variety of ways to manage risk and support their clients. I joined a team for a big global firm that helped both project manage and grow relationships and develop business. I brought a few skill sets like the ability to investigate things, to write well as a knowledge of some of the markets that were important for our clients, like China. But what I saw getting involved in this industry was how incredibly good these former CIA case officers were at establishing relationships with just about anybody, even people I knew that they straight up didn't like. I started kind of taking notes and learning from them. I also, worked side by side with them on some really colorful cases where I learned some elements of tradecraft, how to pull out information in subtle ways, how to manage people that are upset, and a variety of different things. I worked in the kidnap for ransom space, so I learned some of those things from former chief hostage negotiators. And over the years, I've been using those skills to make sales, to grow relationships, not only in my professional life, but also in my personal life. And I decided to develop a bit of a sales program, speaking platform, and write a book on it, which is what I've done and which is coming out next month.
Tell us the name of your book again.
Yeah, the book is called Sell Like a Spy, and it's available on August 27th.
All right, beautiful. So we'll just jump right into the sales conversation. So why are spies, as it says in your, I'm assuming your book says this as well, but why are spies the best salespeople?
Yeah, I call them the world's best salespeople. Because look, I call them that because I like to say that there's no harder sale you could possibly make than convincing someone to buy into treason against their own country or organization. So they make what I consider to be the most difficult sale. And the way that they do that and how they navigate, again, spies don't necessarily pitch people they would choose to go on a round of golf with. They often have to pitch and get to know terrorists, criminals, diplomats from some really bad places. And they have to leverage radical empathy and use some other skills to get over those compunctions to make their sale. That's one of the many ways that spies are so good at focusing on their mission, focusing on making that sale, and blocking out all those other things by using human nature, by using intellectual curiosity, by remembering that even the worst people have a kernel of humanity, of something good in them. And that's what radical empathy is all about. The idea of, really focusing on, the terrorist who practices acts of charitable good, or the criminal that's really a devoted family man or something. So the spy doesn't necessarily look at all the downsides. They're looking at what they can connect with that person on. And that's what I train salespeople to do as well, to think about the Abraham Lincoln quote that I like a lot. I don't like that person. I must get to know him better. So that's just a bit about why they're so good at what they do.
So help us. So you mentioned radical empathy. curiosity. I think it was human nature. So help us understand now, as salespeople that are listening to this, how do they use, like, I will give us an example of how someone would use radical empathy
Yeah.
to connect with somebody and close a sale.
Absolutely. So, in our interactions day by day, we meet someone, and sometimes we like to say we hit it off. You just kind of had that natural rapport with somebody. Many times in my career, I'm sure yours too, David, that you meet a client or a prospect and you guys become friends because you have that. But I would assume in your long sales career, and I know I've seen it in mine, that you don't always hit it off with your client or prospect, right? So, and sometimes your client or prospect might be somebody you straight up don't like. It's not neutral, but they're rubbing you the wrong way. Maybe they're not treating you with the level of respect that you think you've earned, or maybe they clearly, come from a different political persuasion, or whatever the case may be. Looking for something in them that you can, glom onto and enjoy. Maybe you're both baseball fans. Maybe you both have families. Maybe you went to, college with a big college basketball program. It's diligently seeking out those areas. If I may, I think there's one other area that is a good thing to think about in these cases that I write about pretty extensively in the book. And there's a whole personal side that I talk about that I've experienced this, but vulnerability is an incredible way to kind of change up a sale, a meeting that is involved in these kind of tensions. So the idea is if you make yourself vulnerable, you can show your humanity. And what I talk about extensively in the book, I'll keep it really brief here, is I had a brain tumor about 12 years ago. It was benign, but it cost me the hearing in my right ear. So there's a lot of situations where I position myself to be on a certain side of somebody, whether walking on the street, sitting at a busy restaurant's lunch table. And I often have to explain why I do that. And a lot of times that has been in the context of a stiff business meeting with someone, people don't always want to be sold to. So sometimes they're keeping you at arm's length. But when I reveal this, when it comes up somewhat naturally, when I make myself vulnerable, all of a sudden I go from being a salesperson to just a human being. My humanity is up front. And something special also happens where they tend to respond in kind. It's human nature. They tend to share something deep about themselves or a loved one. And all of a sudden we've crossed this Rubicon of intimacy and created a bond in a certain way. And spies are experts at this. One guy I talk about in my book has a son with, it was Tourette's, or it was on the spectrum of some sort, maybe Asperger's. And when he was connecting with potential agents in the Middle East, which is very family oriented, he mentioned this, and he found somebody that he was looking to cultivate that had a similar issue in his or her family. I don't recall. And it led to a breakthrough in their relationship. So people think in the professional world, you have to be this stiff, uber professional person. Of course, you want to be professional, but making yourself vulnerable and opening yourself up and sharing something about yourself is a good way to change the narrative of those difficult conversations.
That's a really good point. So, as I'm also wondering, what happens, because I work with a lot of salespeople, and one thing you'll hear is, well, I didn't click with that person, like you said, or we didn't hit it off, and they just kind of, I hate to say, kind of give up on it, and then they'll just write it off as like, well, that's a bad one. I mean, are there situations where maybe you don't even click with the person, but you can still help them solve a problem, right? Like, are there any situations where like you just, maybe you never do hit it off, but you still are able to close the sale and help them with their issue, or am I just crazy?
Of course. I mean, I think 3/4 of my sales in my life are probably in that ball game. I while there's definitely people I've clicked with and even, to this day maintain a real friendship with, most of the time there are people I was neutral about, or people, I've sold to a lot of people in finance and legal communities. There's awesome people there too. There's also some seriously arrogant people in that world as well. And I'm very proud of my ability to have navigated these people, whether they needed their ego stroked, whether they, I would made myself vulnerable and we found a way to connect, whether some of the other things I write about, I've already mentioned baseball. I have a section called Use Your Superpowers, where I talk with salespeople about finding a couple of subjects that they can use as a go-to, to come back to and put the conversation on a setting where you can thrive, and you don't need to do all the talking on these areas. It's not an excuse to just hold court. That can happen sometimes. That's great. I love to tell all my weird stories from overseas and, drinking Cobra blood and all sorts of crazy stuff that I got into overseas. But it's not just about holding court. It's about putting the conversation on a level where you can thrive. And that's what I train salespeople to do as well. So there's a variety of tactics to overcome these personality challenges.
So you're not going to put like the fact that, hey, maybe I don't really want to have a coffee with this guy or lunch with him or whatever the case may be, or hang out, but yet I still know that they have an issue and I can solve that issue. So you're looking at it from that perspective of
Absolutely.
Really trying to, yeah. So for people listening, like, how does somebody get into that mindset? Cause I feel like, Jeremy, a lot of salespeople get stuck like, oh God, I can't make the connection. And people think sales is all about just rapport and making a connection. I mean, that is part of it, as you said earlier, but it's not the whole part of it.
No, and that's why I think that the thinking about using spy tactics in the sales world can be ennobling. It can help you. It can help you sort of change the subject up and change your mindset. If you go from being a salesperson that's going to a meeting with someone you dislike to thinking yourself as a CIA case officer trying to influence somebody to win them over, that makes selling a little bit more fun. It can kind of change your mindset. One of the sections in the book and one of the training modules I work with clients on that I call Spies in Disguise. I like to say that disguises is one of the few areas that Hollywood gets somewhat right. And there's a fascinating relationship between Hollywood and the espionage community. But you can put yourself in sort of a disguise to sort of change your mindset. And in the book, I talk about what I call the Mad Men method. For fans of Mad Men, you might remember Don Draper, the sort of stoic, handsome, charismatic top executive with tons of gravitas, or Roger Sterling, who has a different kind of gravitas, that silver fox, that, really social, fun guy that loves to take clients out. You put on a different mask, and it doesn't have to be those two. It can be someone you admire. And I work with clients. We go out in these town halls, if you will, these open discussions where people tell me who they admire in the worlds of literature, TV, movies, sports, whatever it is. And you take some of those qualities that you admire and you bring them to that sales environment where you're not that into that person. Or, as I talk about in the book, you just don't want to be there. You're having a terrible day. You had a fight with your spouse, your kids are misbehaving, whatever it might be. But these kind of tactics, putting another tool in your toolkit to overcome these challenges and shift your mindset, can be extraordinarily valuable.
Love it. And I just have to ask you this, man. What's up with drinking Cobra blood? I mean, you said that it clicked earlier. Like, what is?
Yeah, I usually mention that, and one of the other big ones was getting deported from Brazil one time. But the Cobra blood was I was in Taipei, Taiwan, on assignment, and a fellow journalist told me about this certain street in Taipei that had all these strange Chinese medicinal cures, and the areas had Cobra blood that you could drink for a variety of, let's say, male sort of issues that you might experience. And they mix the Cobra blood with a little sugar water and you drink it down. And I tasted it just as a curiosity, and then went out and hit the bars with my journalist friend. But it was quite an experience.
I'm scared to ask the next question.
Don't it happened.
So yeah, and I'm assuming that doesn't make you better at sales, though. So. But well, maybe it does actually. Who knows?
It's a story to tell. So,
Yeah.
You were curious about it, weren't you?
Yeah. I guess you're right. You're absolutely right. What would you say is? I wrote a few things. You talked about superpower earlier. How does somebody know what their superpower is?
Yeah, I mean, it should be pretty obvious. And look, a lot of times I say mine are, baseball, travel. Those are a couple, and music. I'm a musician as well. And, people say to me, well, Jeremy, look, I'm not somebody who lived overseas. I don't have these esoteric interests. I'd say, I'm somebody who goes to his church. I'm into my family and I golf. Those are my three most basic ones. And so anybody can come up with things that they care about. I don't usually struggle with people to find those. What I like to find with people is to figure out at least one that might be somewhat esoteric. Because if you're like, I'm really passionate about French cooking, you're not going to necessarily hit on that with everybody, or scuba diving or collecting stamps. But when you do, you have a friend for life if you found something in that way. So I like to say, go deep, but stay broad. I don't go as deep on, I don't go as broad, I should say. So for instance, I don't golf. So that's been a problem for me sometimes in business, but I can move the conversations back to my superpowers and have a compelling conversation. So I work with people to think about interests and passions that they have and how to leverage those.
So it sounds like that is important to you. Because when I thought of superpower, I thought of like, well, I don't ever give up. I have great systems for follow up, right? Like I'm going to follow up for years until it happens, right? So to me, that was what I thought of for a superpower, but your superpower is totally different than that.
Yeah, you're talking about more like traits, skill sets. I'm talking about your interests and passions. And
Okay.
so another example, and it's at the very beginning of the book, is I call it the spy who skied. And we talk about a very well-known case officer who I don't name in there, who is a passionate skier. And throughout his many tours overseas with the agency, would look to ski in esoteric places. And he was based in Central Asia, and he was trying to meet with Russian diplomats who had a restriction, meeting one-on-one with U.S. diplomats. He had cover as a diplomat. Well, he knew that Russians are avid mountaineers, so he went to the ski slopes of this, tiny Central Asian country, and sure enough, he bumped into Russians there who responded to him on the ski slopes because he's a passionate skier. He's an excellent skier. And he met Russians outside of the stiff confines of the diplomatic circle, was able to build rapport and get to the people he needed to get to. So whether you're a big golfer and you meet people at your country club, a tennis player, a rec league softball player, I tell people, and I'm not just proselytizing about sales, I'm talking about a life well lived, that you should have these interests and not just sit home on the couch, watching Netflix or something like that. Getting out there and living a rich life is going to expose you not only to more people who might help you grow your career, but it'll help you find avenues of connectivity in an age where we're very atomized and polarized by social media.
So what I'm guessing, are you doing some you must be doing some homework on before you meet with somebody. Are you figuring out like, okay, this is what they're interested in, and how much of that are you doing?
I do a lot of that, and I encourage clients in workshops and my talks to do that. So, the obvious place is LinkedIn to start because it's such a great repository of people's professional history. And they also list things that are beyond the professional side. So I tell people, look where people volunteer or what their charities are that they support. Maybe you're also passionate about adoption of cats and dogs, and you find that on there. They'll likely light up if you mention, and you don't have to reference their LinkedIn page. If you mention, oh, my adopted dog, he brings us so much joy, I'm sure their eyes will light up when they hear that. So you don't have to draw attention to it. But, the LinkedIn repository is incredible. You see somebody who has a 20-year career, maybe they spent 5 years of it in Boston, and you're from Boston, and you can see that. And, you can ask them about it, or you can subtly mention the city. So of course, you want to think about the professional side, but I'm looking for a personal connection on some of those things, and get beyond LinkedIn. You go to other social media, you just, maybe somebody who knows them. So get creative without getting creepy on, you don't want to stalk somebody or do something inappropriate, but trying to develop a background or a dossier of information on somebody is good practice. And it's it's what spies do and what the agency does. And they go well beyond that when they're targeting somebody.
Yeah, I love it. Great advice. So I'm going to ask you this question. What is the biggest mistake? Well, I've got two I wrote down, but this is probably an easier one, but what would you say is probably the biggest mistake you see when it comes to salespeople, when it comes to sales?
Yeah, that's an easy one. I'm thinking they always comes to mind, two of the best salespeople I've ever encountered who are both incredibly charismatic people, passionate about the service that we were both working on at the time, deeply knowledgeable about the sector. But David, they're so in love with their own voice. They don't shut up. You go to a client meeting with them and they just want to get on their pedestal and tell you about how the company we worked for was so wonderful and can solve every problem. And I was just talking about this with a very big professional services firm today, that breaking up your pitch into segments and asking, leading questions, and you come back to your pitch when you can, is good practice. Having a really good elevator pitch is good practice. I say that active listening is the best, most important skill that any spy or salesperson could have. And we talk a lot about the challenges behind being a great active listener and the rewards from it. But in summary, I think the biggest challenge is that salespeople tend to be extroverts, and they love talking, and they love talking about how great their product or service is. And it ultimately is an Achilles heel, I think.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. Years ago, I 23 years in real estate. I'm still a broker. I mean, I work, that's one thing I still do. I don't think I'll ever give that up. I enjoy it. And, but in the beginning, the person that trained me told me I needed to think like a detective. And I feel like it's very similar to the conversation we're having right now. Like
Sure.
the detective, what they're doing is they're doing all their research. They're digging deeper. They're figuring things out, right? They're asking a lot of questions. To me, that it's very
That's true,
similar.
David, but it's not just the questions, it's which questions. There's a whole section on the book on eliciting information, how to subtly collect information. A detective is going to be somebody when they're, questioning somebody, is going to read body language, and a detective, is somebody who, when they seat somebody in the interrogation room, is going to put a pen near that person sitting there, or put them on a roller chair. And they're going to watch when that person starts fidgeting with the pen or starts, rolling on their chair. There's a lot in my book about how to observe clients and their body language and watch to see when what they're doing, why they're doing it, and what question or comment triggered that. So there's a lot of subtle things you can pick up, just like a detective. So you got some good advice early in your career there.
I love it. Can you send me a copy of your book when it comes out, and then we'll do another one after
Sure.
I had a chance to read the book, man?
Sure.
I think that would be great. And let me ask you this. So first off, you said we're a month out. How does somebody get a copy? Like, what's the best way if somebody's like, oh, I'm listening to this, I need to get a copy of this book?
Yeah, it's widely available, Amazon, Target, Barnes and Noble. I definitely, whenever I mention this, I always want to mention, go to your small local bookstore and order it. They would love to do that. I value local bookstores, but it's very available on all the big platforms. And my website, selllikeaspy.net, has a link to all of it as well. And there's going to be an audiobook, and it'll be out there in Italian and in German. So other languages to come.
That's awesome. Are you, do you narrate it, or is that?
I'm about to go to the studio and narrate it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. Let me ask you this. What is your, like, how like we all, like I'm a 36-year salesperson. I love sales. I teach, like we all have our difficult, like the hard sale that you're like, man, that one it sucked going through it. But then when it got closed, you're like proud of it, right? Give us your story. Like, what's your favorite like sale, like your hardest maybe, or whatever gives you the most satisfaction, like the one you're most proud of?
That's probably pretty easy. And I talk about it again in the book. There's a section towards the end called Crawl, Walk, Run, which is a spy development method about that I suggest you use for the big whale, the big fish prospect that you're trying to land. In my case, at this particular professional services firm, we already had a retainer with this client, and they were managed out of our office in Asia. But it was a small, low six figures client. But the CEO, the founder, and some key people were in New York. I got to know them. They had an emerging markets focus. I can speak the language of those those markets very well. And I got to know this person, hoping that he might introduce me to some peers. But what I found out, David, through perhaps some of those detective methods and good questions and rapport building, was that he had a need that wasn't being met. He wanted to sit at the table with some of the biggest figures in New York City finance. And I was able to put him at such a table because of the events my firm ran. I also interested him in the broader suite of services that we had at this firm, and he, seeing his, hopeful peers at the table supposedly using those services in that way, he wanted to play in the big leagues. So I took my time, which isn't always a strength of mine. I'm a New Yorker. I'm always in a hurry. Patience doesn't always come naturally, but I took my time. Crucially, I didn't negotiate against myself, which is another thing I talk about, and leveraged a variety of different methods that, again, I talk about in greater length. And it led to the second largest upgrade in the firm's history. It went from about 100K to nearly 800K in just a couple months. And it led to, a great bonus for me. I was promoted to vice president. I did a great trip to Asia. I spoke to our annual conference. So it was just the biggest sale of my career. that's probably the one. Although the greatest experience was when I managed to go down to New York Yankees spring training and brief them on risk and security because of the relationship I built. But that's another story.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've got one. How I got Gary V on my podcast is is always a fun one. And yeah, for people, you guys can go back and listen to episode 103 actually is the episode with Gary V, and then I think it's 121 is how I actually bring people through how I did it, and it was a long process, and it was a lot of follow up, and it kept showing up at his events, and got him to hold my, like he did a presentation in New York at gosh, what's the name of the big place in New York where they do all the events and stuff?
Javits Center? Not
Javits Center, but they're boxing there. Gosh, what's the are you in New York?
I am.
Yeah. So the Madison Square Garden, right? He had a big event there, and I had him holding my book on stage. I just literally walked up to the front of the stage and said, "Hey, Gary," and handed it to him. He walked over to the edge of the stage and he grabbed it from me.
You got to be bold. You got to be bold.
Man. So, but anyway, yeah, that's always one of my favorites. So, well, it's been awesome to have you on, man. I'm excited to check out your book. Sincerely. I don't read every book, but you're in my space. I want to know as much as I can about sales. I want to keep getting better, and I think you bring a lot to the table. So thank you for being here today, man.
Thank you. I think the book is part memoir too of a fairly unique career, and it features a lot of interesting stuff about the world of corporate security, some colorful things, and every skill is laid out with an anecdote, some interesting stories. So I think it'll be a compelling read as well. And listen, David, thank you very much for having me. I look forward to going to check out that episode you referenced, and I appreciate you and your listeners.
Thanks. Yeah. And one more question, man, just anything that I didn't ask that I should have asked that you want to get out there.
Let's see. What should you have asked that you didn't ask? Sometimes people want me to talk about diffusing difficult encounters and how to get people to calm down. And there's a lot of times a client can get upset, or you're just out and about in the world and someone gets upset. And one of the key things to realize in any situation when you're trying to diffuse it, I'll tell you two quick things amongst those. Number one is if someone's yelling and angry, if you speak in a slower, steady voice, which is what hostage negotiators do in their tense environments, you're going to get someone to calm down. Eventually, people will revert to the social mean that you're establishing. And look, what you should determine if there's a situation where someone's upset, are they upset with you or are they upset with the situation? As a colorful former Israeli Defense Forces veteran said to me, is it F you or F this? If it's F this, you can figure out a solution because you're trying to figure out something that's external to you as a person. If it's F you, then there's a little bit of a problem and you need to think about risk mitigation in a different way. So I don't know. Those are a couple things that came to mind.
No, that's awesome. A great place to wrap. Maybe you can talk to my wife about the being calm thing.
I always get that.
Yeah. But all right. Well, listen, man, appreciate you again. Thank you for being here, and look forward to getting a copy of your book.
Thanks, David. Take care.